All right, it is Sunday night and it is time to do another video. This week we are talking about the power of story. Yes, a story can be a non-count noun. So let's start out by talking, this is basically about the power of fiction, okay? Suppose you have a movie that you've seen or a book that you've read that has changed your life. And you recommend this movie to a friend. You yourself went to see this movie, and after you came out of that movie, everything changed for you. Your life turned around. You started doing things differently. Okay, and it's like the movie saved you. Okay, so you tell a friend about it, about your life-changing experience with this movie or this book, and so your friend goes and checks it out. And then your friend comes back to you and says, what, are you an idiot or something? That story never really happened, right? That's just fiction. So you're basing that life change on a fictional event. Okay, so now this might draw some attention to the nature of religion. In other words, like some people in religion require that their religion be true. This calls into question the nature of faith too. Like, what is faith exactly? Is it trust, or is it belief that something is true? Okay, so they go to you and they say, oh, I saw this movie that you recommended, or I read this book that you recommended, and it's just a work of fiction. How can that possibly change your life? It's not real. It never happened. And then your response is, oh, well, it's too late for me. My life has already changed. So the proof is in the pudding. I've already had the experience of the change. And therefore, I would still recommend the movie or the book to others. And how sad for you that you weren't able to experience that change because you dismissed it as unreal. So story is very powerful. And a lot of times, many of the things that we believe to be true, factually true, those are also stories. Because anything you say about reality is just a story about reality. What you say about it isn't really quite what happened. You might be making an attempt to portray it as, accurately, let's say, and that's fine. But you have to remember that it's still a story. So your retelling of something that happened can have a variety of effects on your audience. Okay, as you well know, if you've been paying attention to biased news sources, which they're all pretty much biased these days, right? They put their spin on it, and you can tell somebody's trying to manipulate you. Somebody's trying to change the narrative. And that's a big buzzword now. It's like, they're spinning a narrative. Okay, so people who spin a narrative in regard to politics or sales or business or religion, they are more or less aware that story is very powerful. Okay, and they're using story to possibly manipulate you, but also to help you change your life, okay, or to find meaning or purpose or power. Magic relies most heavily on this faculty, on the ability of you to process story. But not only process story, but to participate in the creation of story. Let's go back into the biology of that. Okay, so why is story so powerful for us? It's kind of weird too. We enjoy it a lot. Why do we go to the movies and watch this horrible movie about evil villains oppressing people, and then the hero comes along and has to suffer so horribly to overcome all the obstacles? Why do we enjoy that? It's terrifying. Horrifying. So it's really an instinct that we have. We have an instinct for storytelling. So when when our caveman ancestors sat around the campfire, possibly we were eating something like a fresh kill, and then one of the hunters says to the group, it's like, oh well, Ugg here almost died in securing this bison or this antelope or this gazelle. And then, of course, everybody goes, oh no, tell us the story. Tell us the story. Everybody wants to hear. Because so and so almost died, but he didn't die, did he? And so we developed a natural instinct to want to hear how Ugg survived. Okay. Now, this is why when you're driving along the superhighway, like here in South Florida, it's I-95, driving along I-95, and suddenly the traffic slows down. It's like, what the heck is going on? Who's blocking traffic? And lo and behold, you eventually make it up to where the blockage is, and there is no blockage. Somebody has just had an accident and their car is off to the side of the road. There's no blockage of traffic, but people are simply slowing down to look. It's what they call rubbernecking, right? That's an instinct. People are looking to see what happened. Okay, so that's a storytelling instinct kicking in, saying, what can I learn from this? What's the narrative? What happened? How can I avoid misfortune like this in the future? This is the storytelling instinct in its most raw form. Okay, and this is why we enjoy stories, even the most frightening ones. And this is why horror movies can be really cool, can be really fun. Especially if they're pointing out real types of danger and how to overcome that. So you can start looking at our faculties in regard to storytelling. All of these things are basically instincts. Okay, so let's start out with FOMO, the fear of missing out. This is something that your smartphone, oh my gosh, I have one right here. The people who designed the software for this, the apps for this, they take advantage of your FOMO instinct, especially that infinite scroll. I don't want to miss anything. I need to keep scrolling because this is all important, right? This is news, and dancing cat videos. There is that tendency to want to feel like you're not missing out. So I know as much as my neighbor knows, okay? And that instinct or that fear of missing out is unconscious. And people are taking advantage of that. How much news do you really need? And yet many people can't seem to get enough of it because it just keeps triggering that instinct. Boom, 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 boom. That FOMO instinct keeps they're pushing your button. Don't miss out. This is what happened. Look, you want to be just as informed as the person next to you, right? Right. When you become conscious of that, then you can start to, let's stay away from the news. In fact, I recommend staying away from it entirely. Gossip, same thing, okay? We want to hear what's going on. We want people to come from other areas and report what they've seen there, okay? It's the same kind of instinct. Gossip is an instinct because when we hear about what happened to Ugg on that hunting expedition, not only do we enjoy it and learn from it, but we share it with others. Okay. Well, we could also warn others too about, well, Ugg's not a very good hunter. He's kind of like, he's kind of dangerous. Like, let's warn you about him and start, spreading tales about Ugg because he's not really that reliable as a hunter. Gossip, right? But both a good thing and a bad thing. So when you see people gossiping, or you find yourself participating in gossip, don't be so hard on yourself because it's an instinct. Okay. It's kind of unconscious when it just kind of keeps going. But then you can, now that you know this, you can catch yourself in the act of doing it and say to yourself, well, how much gossip do I really need? Like, in fact, what purpose does gossip serve? Let's just participate in it so that it's constructive and actually does something that's useful. And then the rest of it you just don't participate in, these other things are literary devices, personification. Okay, so there's a tendency to personify the forces of nature, let's say. It's like, oh, the weather was very angry today. And when we do this, the elements in the story also are characters, so we can more easily remember them. Okay, not only that, but it also acknowledges that the forces of nature are somewhat alive or potentially alive. Okay, so it's kind of a living universe, or a universe that is potentially alive. It is not necessarily biologically alive, but it certainly has self-organizing systems within it that have personalities, characteristics, okay? And if we personify them, then we can sort of remember them better. It's a natural tendency for us to do that. It's not superstitious necessarily, as long as you're aware that you're doing it. Same thing for metaphor, symbolism. These are all things that the psyche does automatically. In fact, it's going to do it all over you if you're not careful. So metaphor and symbolism is not something that you learn how to do. It's something that you become aware of your mind already doing. And then you can begin to recognize it, harness it, and then use it more effectively, just as you can also use FOMO and gossip more effectively. Okay, characterization is also very important. I think we'll get to that later. And one of the most powerful things and most dangerous things is abstraction. We'll also talk about that later. That is most certainly a human instinct. It's sort of right along with our language instinct. Humans have an instinct for language. Auditory language, spoken language. Also, sign language, symbols, hand signals, a lot of facial language going on. There's a lot communicated in the face and in body language, but we have an especially strong instinct for spoken language, which other animals do not seem to have. Not to the same degree that we do. They do seem to have other forms of communication. I wouldn't call it spoken exactly, but similar, yeah. Signaling and transmitting, like sonar, things like that. Let's do some examples of the power of story, like the magical power of story or the magical power of myth. Suppose that there is an adult who has recently realized that she has been abused as a child. Okay, and didn't really remember. The memories are now surfacing. Okay, and now she realizes, oh my gosh, this is why my life has been so screwed up. And then maybe a therapist might help this person realize that, okay, this happened to you. Yes? What are you going to do about it? So it's what we're realizing now is that all through your life, it has defined you as a victim, somebody who's there to be kicked around, somebody who's not good enough, somebody who is usable and discardable. You've been defined this way, and you've been treating yourself this way. Okay. And the more angry you get at the person or people who did this to you, it's probably just going to end up perpetuating that. See, you made me who I am today, and everything's your fault, and my life's a mess, and I'm just victim, and you're the villain. You can see what's happening here. That story has taken over your life. You are the victim, they are the bad guy, and now the only thing that can help you is, I don't know, some heroic therapist is going to swoop in and save you. If the therapist is worth his or her salt, they won't do that, because they're going to say, no, you are going to save you. You are going to rewrite what happened to you. It doesn't mean you gloss over what happened to you, but you revisit what happened, and then you redefine it and you make new meaning out of it. It's like, okay, this happened. It has made me who I am today. Somebody who can look this kind of evil in the eye and not flinch. I'm stronger now. Not only that, I can help others focus or face down the same kind of fears within themselves. Okay, they start to rewrite this thing as, oh, this adversity, whatever it is, happened for a reason, let's say, and now it's given me the abilities and the endurance and the strength to now do so and so. Okay, none of this is necessarily true, but neither was that victim villain scenario. That wasn't true either. Stuff just happened, and then suddenly, automatically, the biology made a victim villain scenario out of it, a learned helplessness scenario out of it, and then that story dominates the rest of that person's life, unless it is rewritten, re-dramatized. Okay, not lied about, not changed in regard to what happened, but changed in regard to the purpose of what happened. A new purpose is being assigned. Proceeding in an as-if mode, as if what happened to me happened for a reason, and now this is how I can benefit, and this is how everyone can benefit from what happened to me. All right. Another example, healing the entire world, not just healing a life, healing the world. Very simple narrative. 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Columbus discovers America. In 1492, Columbus discovered America. Okay, naturally there's a narrative, there's a series of events that happens. You know, the three ships go over the ocean and they're looking for the route around the world. And they think they've come across the Indies, but they've actually come across, I guess it is the Bahamas, right? And but anyway, the story that I was told in history classes in the 1970s was that Columbus discovered America. That is a terribly damaging interpretation of history. The implication of Columbus discovering America, the implication is that no humans were here. So Columbus was the first one. He discovered America, okay? You might say, well, no, the Vikings discovered America, right? Or there are other people came over. It's like, no, there were people already here. There were humans already here. If we say that Columbus discovered America or the Vikings discovered America, we are basically implying that the people who were already here are not people. Okay, so thank goodness we have now rewritten that narrative in history class. It's like he didn't discover America. There were already human beings here. Okay, the immense amount of damage that did at the time and still is doing to this day, because that narrative is still kind of present, right, is that, well, only, white Europeans are human and that these others don't count. And we can kind of just, they're like natural forces. We just kind of do with them as we please. Okay, so rewriting that narrative heals the entire world because it's such a powerful interpretation of what it is to be human, okay? So rewriting that, he did not discover America. He discovered it on behalf of Spain, let's say, or on behalf of several countries in Europe, okay? But there were people who discovered it before him. In fact, many people discovered it by being born there. It's like, oh, here I am, right? Okay. Finding purpose and power. So let's talk about men. There's a cool story about this guy named Gaius of Warwick, and he is a fantasy character. He is a warrior. He wields a two-handed sword. Sometimes he wields a long sword and a shield or a hammer, right? And he's really strong. Okay, he's very young though. He's very cocky, and he's got a lot of hormones, and he's a character in a story, and he is kind of torn between the life of a farmer or becoming a great warrior. And so he does eventually run off and use the family money to buy a suit of armor and weapons, and he goes adventuring. But he's still kind of torn between the life of a warrior or whether he should just go settle down and run a farm, because he's got the skills for both. He even meets a beautiful woman in a tavern, and he's like, "Wow, she'd make a great wife. I could just settle down on a farm with her." But somehow something about her terrifies him. He can't seem to talk to her because he's afraid. He's afraid to talk to her. He doesn't know why. And it's because he's got this destiny that's breathing down his neck. So he's kind of looking for his true purpose in life. He's kind of floundering between, this, should I be a farmer? Should I be a great warrior? And so something happens to him. He gets poisoned. He's in on this dungeon adventure, and his poison needle trap pricks his finger, and he falls unconscious. He almost dies. And while he is unconscious, he has a sort of vision of his father coming to visit him. Okay. And so as he is sort of slipping down into death, because the poison is kind of taking over his system, everything starts to go black. He's like, "Oh, this is the way it ends, isn't it? I'm going to die, and I haven't realized what my true purpose is, farmer or warrior," right? And so, but eventually he starts to come out of it. Look, oh, the poison's not killing me. I think I'm going to be okay. And then so he's got this sort of dark pit of death that he was going to be descending into, and it's kind of now leaving him, and he's getting better now. And as he is getting better, as the darkness starts to recede and he begins to work his way upwards towards consciousness again, somehow he recognizes that this darkness of death that he was descending into, he's like, wow, many men fall into that. Their life is kind of like a living death or living darkness. Somehow he recognizes that many men have already fallen into that dark place, even while still alive. They settle for it. They let it tame them, and they walk through the world as though alive, but they might as well be dead. This is a test that all men face, and some are even born having already failed it. This is a very powerful interpretation of his near-death experience. And so he begins to look at that, his experience of wanting to be a farmer as him being tamed by an ordinary life, settling for less than being a super powerful warrior. And indeed, as he's trying to regain consciousness, he has a vision of his father that comes to visit him and says, yes, that place of darkness and insignificance is not for you, not if I have anything to say about it. You must fight, son. You come from a long line of esteemed warriors, and our ancestral line is still strong, unlike others who have fallen into decline. Our ancestral line is strong because we have kept it that way. We have answered the call of becoming a warrior, and we allow ourselves to be tested, and we either pass the tests of being a warrior or we die trying, and we are strong because of it. And so the implication is that if he becomes a farmer, he's going to become weak. Okay, it's a very interesting myth of manhood, because it's kind of what men are facing as civilization takes over and sort of tames them. Okay, notice how, a man becoming a farmer or becoming an office worker or becoming, tamed and civilized, that isn't necessarily a bad thing. Okay, but it can be interpreted that way. And then a new narrative can take over where the The man basically regards his life as a test of his prowess, of his power, of his will, okay, his strength. Okay. So, and then Gaius eventually comes out of the unconsciousness, and he wakes up with a new purpose. It's like, okay, I'm not going to be a farmer anymore. And the interesting thing is that he sees that beautiful barmaid again, and he can actually talk to her now. He's not afraid of her anymore, because it seemed that she represented something that was going to take his strength away. If he settled down with her and became a farmer, he wasn't going to live up to the test of his ancestors that would keep his ancestral line really strong, like a bunch of warriors. Okay, is that narrative that he's choosing, is it good? No. He could become a really nasty warrior and kill lots of people, right? Is it powerful? Yeah. He could have chosen a narrative of the farmer and made that powerful too. Okay, but he's made his choice now. And so it's interesting too, because the narrative he's chosen is also very dangerous. There's a lot of danger in stories, okay? You could even see that if he doesn't live up to that warrior lifestyle, if he fails, he could be suicidal. It's like, well, I might as well not be alive, because that's the interpretation, right? If I can't be this great warrior, then I've failed the test, and I might as well not be alive. I wonder why so many men kill themselves, especially lately. I wonder why that's happening. So the art of story. The ability to analyze stories is very important, okay? And one can take a literature class to develop that ability, okay? Or a mythology class, okay? Or simply study literature and astrology, okay? And let's say you're studying literature so you can get a better handle on how story works. Because you've heard about this thing, Lyam said story is really powerful, right? Well, okay, how do I make story work for me? Because it's really the essence of magic anyway, okay? Well, you learn to handle story by learning to analyze literature or mythology, okay? The way that you analyze literature or stories or mythology is, there's several steps to it. Step one is to identify the powerful effect that the story has, the myth has, okay? What is it doing to its audience? What's it doing to me? Okay. Step two is, oh, how does it do that? So you identify the literary elements that it employs to have that effect upon you. Okay, and once you identify the little tricks in the narrative that make it have that power over you, let's say, it's like, oh, I can do that too. I can write stories like that. I can make stories like that. Lo and behold, oh, this is how you make your own magical rituals. This is how you do your own magic. It's essentially me knowing the elements of a good story, identifying the ones that work really well in certain situations, and then turning around and using them to rewrite my life, or to rewrite the life of the world, okay, or to help other people rewrite their life or their worldview, okay. But you have to know, the tricks of storytelling to do that in order to redefine a life. There are two reasons mainly for analyzing literature, I would say. So one of them is to figure out how to do it, which you've just talked about. So you notice the effect that the story has. You look at the elements of the story that effectively produce that effect and how they're used to do that. And then you you start making your own stories, or you start revising stories using these devices. Okay. Another reason to analyze stories, to analyze literature or myth or whatever, is so that you become immune to the manipulations of others who are using story on you. This is very important, okay? Because lo and behold, especially nowadays with social media, story is being used all over the place to change your thinking and your behavior, to trigger your Fomo instinct, to trigger your need to be righteous, to be correct all the time, right? So when you realize how story elements are used to produce an effect in the audience or in yourself, okay, you can become immune to other people's attempts to manipulate you. Not only that, but you can also turn around and use those techniques to manipulate them. Okay, and hopefully you will use your powers for good, not for evil, when you learn these tricks. All right. Fictional characters. So what you might notice is that in the magical work, you kind of superimpose the tree of life upon your body. And it's kind of a way of saying that all these characters, these fictional characters, are present within me. So in the Hermetic Kabbalah, each of these spheroth, these 10 circles, can be seen as a perspective. Okay, for example, you could take one particular pantheon of pagan gods and constellate them in these various spheroth. Okay, the most commonly known constellation of pagan deities is through astrology. So we have Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sol, or Helios, which is the sun, right? And we have Venus, Mercury, and Luna, goddess of the moon, or Selene. Okay, so these are the moon goddess, the sun goddess, the sun god, the god of Mars, the goddess of Venus. All these are different ways of interacting and seeing things happening. And of course, there are lots of stories about these gods, about how Mars and Venus occasionally have a fling together, and when that happens, Mars is subdued. He's not so violent for a while. Okay, so these are all elements of storytelling which represent how the world unfolds. And so if you are aware of how these various forces unfold and interact with each other, you supposedly then can orchestrate some of this for yourself. You can look at them and you can orchestrate them. You can reinterpret what's happening. You can rewrite the story. And so that also goes for if you have a particular astrological birth chart. Some people might say, oh, your chart is especially difficult. Let's say, oh my goodness, you were born with Saturn in Aries. That's a very difficult placement. Oh, poor you. Oh well, you're just a victim of the stars, right? And then, so you take that and you say, well, no, let's look at what these characters are. Okay, so Saturn in Aries. That could mean that I'm a late bloomer. Could mean that that I'm going to be really good at using discipline in order to initiate things and get them done. Okay, Saturn in Aries. Saturn tends to restrict Aries. So and Aries is essentially the ability to initiate new things, to be forceful, to be penetrative. And then Saturn will come along and restrict that ability. So your ability to initiate new things, to start new things, to dive in will be limited. But Saturn has a character of its all unto itself. It has it's a sphere of discipline and detachment, abstraction. And so you would say, well, no, I can get things done. I just need to do it in a Saturnian way. I need to have the character of Saturn in order to get those things done. And in fact, Saturn can be very effective at initiating things and maintaining them. So that's an example of someone recharacterizing or using the characterizations that seem to be unfavorable, but then making new meaning out of it. To say, no, I just need to know how to proceed, okay? And astrologers would do that. They'll say, well, it's a difficult placement, yeah, but here's how you can work with that, okay? And it's not to say that, this is not to say that astrology is real or true, okay? It is a meaning-making system itself. It is the power of story that is ready-made and ready to go. It's right out of the box, okay? And I do encourage people who learn astrology to make, once they've mastered it as it is, then begin to creatively reinterpret it, okay? Do not creatively reinterpret it at first. You have to learn the basics first, okay? But once you master it, then you can start to make new narratives, okay? And then see if they work, okay? Test them out. So you rewrite your life, but then of course you rewrite it in a certain way to see what kind of results it will bring. The way you rewrite your life might not work, okay? For instance, Gaius decides to become a warrior because of this, this sort of idea that if you settle for a life of agriculture and civilization, you're going to become weak. Okay, that's not necessarily true, but that's the narrative he's going with, and it might make him powerful. Might get him killed too. Okay. So it's the chance he takes. So that's part of the excitement of magic. All right. Fictional goals. This is really important because many people, with their ability to move forward and go after things in life, they set goals. And that's a really good practice. Okay. However, for some reason, they tend to take their goals literally. The story has to end this way. And so when they don't meet that goal or that objective, they get depressed. But seldom really do we ever achieve the goals the way that we have planned them anyway, especially if we're very, literal about the way things should turn out. Seldom do things really work out that way. So an important thing to acknowledge about story is that end point that you see of living happily ever after in this situation, that's simply a goal that you are holding up right now as a motivator. It's not real. How could it be? It's in the future, right? The future doesn't exist. Okay, so the ability to have the most important thing about the power of story is that the goals that many people believe to be so important, okay, you can wink at those goals and say those are fictional. Okay, what's actually going to happen? It's probably not going to be that, but that goal is going to be very useful for us right now as we strive. We're just going to proceed as if that's where we want to go, but I know better. Okay, so that's a great way of not getting all depressed when you don't achieve your life's goals, okay, because seldom do we ever really do that. We end up in new territories, and then suddenly we just make new goals. And then we end up in territory we didn't expect, and we make more goals. And if you take those goals literally, you will suffer. Okay. Especially if you actually achieve one of them as you wanted it. Oh no, because then that reinforces the idea that goals are real, and they're not. They're not real. They are fictional. But fiction is very powerful, very useful. So, how is this all magical? Like, I have to just tell stories and then magic comes out of that? one of the most pervasive fictional entities in the universe is the line or the boundary. Okay, and I wrote a pretty extensive article on how lines do not exist. That sounds like a very liberal thing to say. Oh, you just so-and-so always stays inside the lines, and I've learned to color outside the lines or something like that. And I'm badass because I don't pay attention to the lines, That's not what I'm talking about here. To really see that lines and boundaries and barriers do not exist. Okay, to look at the world and try to find an actual line or a boundary or a surface for that matter. Not even surfaces exist. Okay. I did talk about that at length in one of my articles. There's an article called The Insanity of Geometry. Okay. But these entities of boundaries and lines and barriers, they are fictional. Okay, and so we use them to create a sort of version of reality, and that version of reality does tend to contain energy and consciousness and will, power, whatever that is, right? Kundalini, okay? And so these imaginary boundaries that we create actually do channel energy, okay? And there are versions of these fictional boundaries and barriers that are more effective than others. And then as you learn magic, as you draw magic circles and symbols and lines and things like that, you are unwittingly teaching yourself that these entities don't really exist, but I pretend that they do, and my energy tends to follow along those lines, those imaginary lines. Okay, it's the same thing you do when you create imaginary characters in the mind. Oh, this is Thor, this is Loki, that Thor entity becomes a container for these virtues and these powers, and the Loki entity becomes a container of imaginary boundaries, right, for these particular virtues. None of those barriers and boundaries or containers, none of those are real necessarily, but that's the way the psyche works, and it entertains those things as if they are real. And so the energy itself then begins to obey the schematicization of reality that you create. All right, and the default narratives that we sort of are born with are not very helpful to us usually. That's usually there's a lot of trauma that has us automatically defined as in danger, as vulnerable, as needy. Okay, oh, I'm this vessel of neediness and victimization, and that's how I am, that's how I came into this world, and that's how I'm always going to be. No, you can rewrite that. So whatever's inside this imaginary container, you can change what's in there, and you can change what's on the outside. Okay, none of that's real either. Okay, but so I guess the main point I'm making here is that the most important fictional entity that you can end up playing with is the line or the barrier or the boundary. Okay, and you control where those boundaries are. This is up to you to do. It's not that when you do that, everything's going to be wonderful. When you reconfigure the boundaries in your life, then you do that just to see what will happen. Things might go really badly, or they might go really well, and then you'll make adjustments and make them even better, or so on and so forth. Okay. So one of the most important things about the power of story or the power of fiction is that the energy itself and the energy of manifestation tends to obey these imaginary boundaries and shapes and characters and constellations of perspectives. The energy of your life and your potentiality will now fill up the imaginary space that you have created with your own storytelling ability. And you have the power to change how that energy constellates in your life. This is why we have this strange practice of configuring the tree of life so that it's now there and you can see all these various perspectives and entities and energies that are lurking in the background. And now you can begin, eventually, you can begin to make your own stories out of them. All right, so that is the power of story. I hope that made sense. Yeah, sometimes I watch these videos afterwards and I'm like, oh, phew, that did make sense. So I'm hoping this was like that, so that this does make a lot of sense for you guys. I guess one of the big takeaways is that if you are not familiar with how stories work, how myths work, how literature works, it's a big heads up to you to learn. Not so you can become a famous writer, but so you can rewrite your life. You can change the narrative of your existence, okay? And you can help others do the same. So that the energy in your life constellates differently, if you want it to. And hopefully when it does, it's going to be a result that you wanted. Because this is trial and error, isn't it? All right, so until next time.